Michael Douglas, a Hollywood titan, a man whose name alone opened every door in the industry. For over 5 decades, he defined what power and charisma looked like on screen, collecting Oscars, building empires, and smiling at the world as though life's weight had simply agreed to leave him alone. But behind that golden legacy lies a story that is not glamorous. It is devastating. An invisible battlefield of silent pain, physical betrayals, and family tragedies that fortune could never prevent. Early 2026. High above the muffled, restless traffic of Manhattan's Upper East Side, an 81-year-old man sits alone in the gathering dusk. The apartment is entirely quiet, save for the heavy, rhythmic ticking of an antique clock in the entryway. On the nightstand beside his bed, there is no golden Oscar statue, just a neatly stacked pile of medical journals on aging. The quiet reality of a man surviving his own legend. The world applauded his invincibility for decades. But few are prepared to face the truth he carries. A battle so deep that no fortune and no spotlight could ever erase it. Before we begin, if Michael's films have ever accompanied you through a certain chapter of your life, leave a like. Behind the red carpet glamour lies a cruel truth, and his first real stage was never lit by glory. Long before the fame, before Wall Street, before the billions at the box office and the status of Hollywood royalty, there was a little boy who simply needed a place to hide. Born in 1944, Michael entered a world where the name Douglas was not just a family name. It was rapidly becoming a monolith. His father, Kirk Douglas, was an absolute force of nature, a cinematic gladiator whose explosive energy consumed all the oxygen in any room he entered. The world decided immediately that Michael was the lucky son of a legend, the heir to an American dynasty. They looked at the photographs of the smiling boy with the famous father and constructed a narrative of absolute privilege. But what the world did not see, what the cameras could never capture, was a crushing, suffocating weight of being born into a shadow that you are expected to somehow outshine. Those early years were not glamorous. They were an exercise in quiet survival. Following his parents' divorce, Michael's reality was split. While his father conquered the globe, Michael's actual day-to-day life was rooted on the East Coast, far from the flashbulbs. Those who knew him then describe a boy who felt the pressure of his bloodline at a volume others simply could not access. There was a constant, unspoken demand hovering in the air. You must be exceptional. You must justify your name. You must become a successful lawyer, a serious man, something that proves you are not just riding the coattails of a movie star. It was a pressure that bordered on compulsion. And in the valleys of that pressure, a quiet, grinding anxiety took root. He did not know then what it was. He only knew that the expectations felt like a physical weight on his chest. To understand the real Michael Douglas, you have to look away from the movie sets and step into a specific room in Brooklyn. The year was 1944, the foundational era of his life, and the setting was his grandfather's study. Picture him there, a young boy wrapped in a soft velvet robe, sitting cross-legged on a rich, intricate Persian carpet. The room was a fortress. The air hung heavy with the smell of old pipe tobacco, a scent that meant safety. All around him were towering shelves of heavy leather books. From somewhere down the hall, the faint, melancholic notes of a piano drifted to the closed door. He wasn't just sitting there. He was surviving. With his nose buried deep in worn adventure novels, he found his only genuine escape. In those pages, there were no expectations. There were no law school pressures looming over his future. There was no Kirk Douglas to be compared to. There was just a boy, the quiet ticking of time, and a world he could control. The world saw a child of privilege who had everything. What they could not see was how hard he was working every single day just to carve out a tiny corner of the world where he was allowed to simply exist. When someone appears to be handling immense family pressure perfectly, does that mean they actually are? Or Does it mean they've simply gotten very good at hiding the cost? The cost for Michael was accumulating in silence. He learned to read the emotional weather of the adults around him with the precision of an instrument. He watched. He internalized. He stayed quiet. Because that is what you do when the world has decided you have no right to complain. Here is something I want you to sit with for a moment. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of someone else's expectations? The feeling that no matter what you achieve, you will always be measured against a standard you never agreed to set? Tell me in the comments. You're not alone in that. I read every single one. As he grew, the pressure reached a breaking point that could no longer be managed quietly in a tobacco-scented study. The academic demands, the push toward respectable, professional life was a script written by someone else. And Michael, the quiet boy on the Persian rug, realized that to survive, he had to tear that script to pieces. He made a decision that was staggering. He would not be a lawyer. He would not stay in the safe, quiet shadows. Instead, he would step into the exact arena that threatened to destroy him. He would become an actor. The reaction was immediate and heavy with skepticism. To walk onto a stage with the last name Douglas was to invite the cruelest, most relentless comparisons imaginable. But he didn't hesitate. Those who knew him then described not recklessness, but an almost frightening clarity. He knew exactly what he was risking. But if you think that Hollywood laid out a red carpet for the son of Kirk Douglas, you have fundamentally misunderstood how cruel this industry can be. The myth of the golden ticket is exactly that, a myth. What waited for him was not glory, and it was certainly not glamorous. What comes next changed everything. Because before he could conquer his father's empire, he would have to be violently broken down by it. Don't go anywhere. Because what happened on the blistering, unforgiving streets of Los Angeles is a chapter of humiliation that the award season highlight reels will never show you. There's a myth about Hollywood royalty that the public guards with a fierce, almost vindictive jealousy. It is the absolute belief that if you carry a famous last name, the doors of the world simply glide open. The assumption is that the son of Spartacus never has to wait in line, never has to skip a meal, and certainly never has to feel the sting of genuine humiliation. The public prefers this narrative because it makes success look unearned. It makes the legend easier to resent. But if you want to understand the architecture of Michael Douglas's actual career, you have to look away from the red carpets. You have to look at the dirt under his fingernails. Because the reality of his early hustle was not a golden ticket. It was a grinding, humiliating gauntlet designed to break him. The late 1960s in New York City. The theater circuit was a ruthless ecosystem that did not care who his father was in fact. Directors often used his name as a weapon against him. He would walk into an audition room, exhausted, and watch the casting directors immediately cross their arms. They would squint at him, searching his face, and you could hear the silent, damning judgment in the room. He's too soft. He doesn't have Kirk's fire. He's just a rich kid playing dress-up. What the world imagined was a young prince returning to a penthouse after an afternoon of reciting lines. What they could not see was a rusty Chevy Impala parked on a dark, freezing New York street. Picture reality. It's 2 a.m. After a grueling, 14-hour day of pounding the pavement, facing rejection after rejection, Michael is not at a glamorous industry party. He is utterly bleary-eyed, crawling into the cramped back seat of that Impala. The car is freezing. He takes off his only decent suit jacket, the one he needs to look sharp and again tomorrow, and folds it over the worn upholstery to use as a makeshift pillow. Listen to the silence of that car. The faint, metallic tick of the cooling engine. The lingering, stale smell of old leather and street exhaust that clings to his clothes. He is shivering. And for dinner, there is no silver cloche being lifted by a waiter. He reaches into a greasy paper bag to pull out cold, stiff French fries and a slab of reheated diner meatloaf. He eats it in the dark, the grease coating his fingers. while the city traffic rumbles past his foggy windows. He did not call his father for a favor. He did not ask for a check. He chewed the cold meatloaf, closed his eyes against the leather of his jacket, and forced himself to sleep so he could wake up and endure the exact same humiliation the next day. He was starving, not just for food, but for validity. He needed to prove, with an almost terrifying desperation, that his talent belonged to him, not his bloodline. Here is what I want to ask you directly. Have you ever worked yourself to the absolute bone in the dark, knowing that even if you succeed, people will assume you had it easy? Have you ever had to swallow your pride just to survive another day? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, because the loneliness of unacknowledged hard work is a universal language. But the grinding nights in the Chevy Impala were only the physical test. The psychological breaking point was still waiting for him. Fast forward to 1971, Los Angeles. The pressure was mounting. He was no longer just a kid fresh out of college. He was a young man whose window of opportunity was beginning to close. The rejections were no longer just character building. They were starting to feel like a permanent verdict. He had prepared obsessively for a major Broadway audition, a role that could finally legitimize him as a serious actor, a role that could separate him from the shadow of Kirk. He walked into that room in L.A. and left his entire soul on the floor. And they said no. It wasn't a maybe next time. It was a definitive, crushing rejection. For Michael, it felt like the final confirmation of his deepest, darkest fear. You are not enough. You will never be enough. When he walked out of that casting office, the psychological panic was suffocating. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't process the shame. He needed to feel something physical, something sharper and more immediate than the humiliation spiraling in his head. In a moment of sheer, raw desperation, right there on the street, he took off his thin, polished dress shoes. He peeled off his socks, and he stepped barefoot onto the scorching hot Hollywood sidewalk. This is the image the world never saw. The heir to a Hollywood empire, walking shoeless on the dirty, blistering asphalt. The heat radiating up through the soles of his feet was intense, almost unbearable. But he kept walking. He needed the pain. He needed the physical shock of the burning pavement to ground his nervous system, to drown out the screaming voice in his head that told him he was a failure. He kept walking. He kept burning his feet. He kept breathing. A few blocks later, a friend happened to walk by and spotted him. Michael was sprawled awkwardly on a low concrete wall, his bare, red feet resting against a hot stone. What was he holding to comfort himself? Just a tiny, flimsy plastic cup of cheap, bitter espresso. The friend approached, concerned. And in that exact second, the survival instinct kicked in. The training of a lifetime took over. Michael forced his posture up. He arranged his face. He smiled a perfect, charming, entirely hollow smile, masking the absolute devastation tearing through his chest. He performed strength. Because when your last name is Douglas, you are not allowed to bleed in public. When was the last time you smiled through absolute failure, just so the world wouldn't see you break? What did it cost you to put that mask on? Tell me in the comments. You are not alone in that exhaustion. The barefoot walk on the asphalt did not break him. It hardened him. It forged a discipline, a quiet, relentless drive that finally, eventually, battered down the doors of the industry. The 1970s arrived, and with them came the streets of San Francisco. Then a massive industry-shaking gamble, producing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The Oscars followed. The box office exploded. The narrative shifted overnight. The world looked at him and said, he finally made it. He is the golden boy. He has conquered the shadow. And from the outside, the machinery of his career was moving flawlessly. He had wealth, respect, and unparalleled fame. But here's a terrifying truth about building an empire on top of unhealed wounds. Success does not cure the trauma. It merely gives it a larger stage on which to detonate. The relentless drive that saved him in the rusty Chevy Impala was now a runaway train and was about to collide with the only thing he had left to lose. Don't go anywhere, because the highest peaks require the cruelest sacrifices. And what happened next behind the closed doors of his Malibu mansion would prove that fame doesn't just demand your sweat, it demands your blood. There is a dangerous illusion that society sells us about extreme success. It is a belief that once you cross a certain threshold of wealth and recognition, the brutal rules of ordinary life simply stop applying to you. The world looks at the Oscars lined up on the mantle, the multi-million-dollar grossing films, the sprawling estates in Malibu, and assumes that inside those walls there must be peace. But success is a hungry, relentless God, and it does not negotiate. When you feed it 18 hours a day, when you pour every ounce of your psychological energy into maintaining an empire, something else has to starve. For Michael Douglas, the drive that carried him out of the freezing Chevy Impala and off the scorching Hollywood pavement had morphed into a compulsion. By the late 1970s and through the 1980s, he was no longer just an actor or a producer. He was an industry. He was filming back-to-back, managing massive productions, shaking hands across continents, and moving at a velocity that would have shattered most men. The press called him a visionary. They called him a titan. What they could not see was a slow, quiet disintegration happening the moment the cameras stopped rolling. In 1977, the cost of that velocity finally demanded payment. You have to understand that Michael's first wife, Diandra Luker, had not married a Hollywood institution. She married the man. But the man was increasingly absent, swallowed whole by the demands of his own ambition. To see the fracture, you don't need a tabloid headline. You just need to stand in a driveway in Malibu. The ocean breeze is sharp, carrying the salt and the cold of the Pacific. It is 1977. The tension that has been quietly suffusing their marriage for months has finally reached critical mass. A heavy wooden door slams shut with a violence that makes the glass vibrate. The sound is immediately followed by the angry roar of a 60s Mustang engine firing up. Diandra storms down the driveway, her face tight with grief that has finally hardened into rage. The tires of the Mustang kick up a cloud of pale Malibu sand. She stops, turns, and in a single devastating motion, she pulls her wedding ring from her finger. She doesn't place it gently in his hand. She throws it onto the cold, hard pavement. The metal clatters against the concrete, a tiny, insignificant sound that carries the weight of a dying decade. "I can't do this anymore," she shouts, her voice cracking over the roar of the ocean and the idling engine. Michael doesn't shout back. He doesn't beg. The survival instinct that taught him to hide his emotions on the streets of L.A. kicks in, paralyzing him. He sits in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the leather steering wheel. The sound of his car engine idling grows distant as he puts it in gear and drives off into heavy sea air. He leaves the ring on the pavement. He leaves her standing in the dust. He drives away into the silence, leaving their marriage irretrievably broken in the rear-view mirror. The world saw a powerful man driving a fast car. What they could not see was a man who had built a global empire, but couldn't figure out how to stay in the same room as the woman he loved. Have you ever watched something beautiful fall apart in your own life because you were simply too consumed with trying to survive or succeed? The quiet horror of knowing you caused a fracture, but feeling utterly powerless to stop it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Because the guilt of ambition is a very specific kind of poison. But the collapse of a marriage was only the first warning shot. The universe, it seems, has a much more brutal way of getting your attention when you refuse to slow down. The 1980s gave way to the early 90s. Michael's career was stratospheric fatal attraction, Wall Street, the Academy Award for Best Actor. He was immortal. He was Gordon Gekko, declaring that greed for lack of a better word, is good. But karma, for lack of a better word, is precise. It is 1991. Michael is on the set of a film. The environment is exactly what you'd expect for a star of his caliber. Controlled, professional, buzzing with the quiet hum of Hollywood machinery. The scent of pine from the surrounding Malibu hills hangs in the afternoon hush. Suddenly, that hush is shattered by a sound that makes the blood in Michael's veins turn to ice. It is a scream. High, terrified, and coming from a child. His 7-year-old son, Cameron, comes running onto the clean and sober film set. The boy is hyperventilating, his cheeks wet with hot tears, his eyes wide with terror that no child should possess. Under Cameron's arm, cradled awkwardly and limply, is his younger brother, Matthew. Michael drops whatever he is holding. The world tunnels. He rushes forward and sees it. Matthew's small forehead is battered, the skin already swelling and bruising into an ugly, furious purple. He had fallen off a moving skateboard while playing nearby, unsupervised in the chaos of his father's world. The controlled Hollywood set erupts into panic. The pine-scented silence is violently torn apart by Michael's own voice, not the smooth, modulated voice of Gordon Gekko, but the sharp, guttural bark of a terrified father. "Get help!" he roars, the sound echoing off the trailers. In that frantic, terrifying sprint to get his bleeding child medical attention, the Oscars, the box office records, and the magazine covers vaporized. None of it mattered. In that moment, holding his bruised son, Michael was forced to confront a truth he had been outrunning for 20 years. His fame, his relentless pursuit of the next project, the environment he had normalized, had nearly cost his child's life. It was a cruel, sickening reminder. He had spent his entire life trying to escape the shadow of Kirk Douglas, trying not to be the absentee, intimidating father that Kirk had been. And yet, here he was, staring at his son's battered face on a movie set, realizing he was repeating the exact same cycle. When you spend your life trying not to become your parents, how terrifying is the moment you realize you are walking in their exact footsteps? What did it take for you to finally break your own family cycle? Share it in the comments. We can all learn from that kind of honesty. He patched up his son. He kept working. He kept the empire running. Because when the machine is that big, you convince yourself you cannot stop it. You convince yourself that the near misses are just bad luck, that the sacrifices are just the cost of doing business. You tell yourself you are still in control. But Michael Douglas was not in control. He was standing on a fault line, and he had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was about to open up and swallow him whole. Don't go anywhere, because what comes next is the moment the invincibility permanently dies. Not from an external threat, but from a betrayal so deep and so intimate, it would force him to fight for the very breath in his lungs. We live in a culture that worships the illusion of control. We build our lives like fortresses accumulating wealth, managing our diets, curating our public images, believing that if we simply work hard enough and gather enough resources, we can keep the chaos of the universe locked outside the gate. For Michael Douglas, that fortress was impenetrable. By 2010, he had survived the grueling climb, the marital collapse, the tabloid scandals, and the terrifying family crises. He was a survivor. He had reinvented himself, found new love with Catherine Zeta-Jones, and settled into the comfortable, untouchable status of an elder statesman of Hollywood. He had won the game. He was the master of his own universe. But biology does not care about your net worth. It does not respect your Oscars, and it certainly does not care about your plans. The collapse of an empire rarely happens with a loud, cinematic explosion. Usually, it happens in a quiet, sterile room, with a few carefully chosen words that permanently alter the trajectory of a life. To understand the exact moment Michael's invincibility died, we have to go to Beverly Hills. It is June 2010. Outside, the Southern California sun is beating down on the manicured lawns and the luxury cars gliding down Wilshire Boulevard. It is a perfect, golden Hollywood afternoon. But inside the medical office, the air is cold. Michael is sitting on a crinkly, paper-covered exam table. The room smells sharply of rubbing alcohol and bleached cotton-A sterile, unforgiving scent that strips away any illusion of glamour. Above him, a soft halogen exam lamp hums quietly, casting a clinical, shadowless light on his face. He is not Gordon Gekko in this room. He is just a 65-year-old man, waiting for a biopsy result. The oncologist sits across from him. She does not look at him with the reverence of Fan. She looks at him with the grave, measured sympathy of a professional about to deliver a bomb. The silence of the room is suffocating. Then, the doctor begins to speak. And as she does, her pen scratches across the pages of his medical chart. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Michael, she says, her voice low and terrifyingly steady. It is stage 4. The clicking sound of her pen punctuates each grave syllable. Squamous cell carcinoma of the tongue. Time stops. The psychological phenomenon of receiving a terminal or severe diagnosis is often described as a sudden, violent detachment from reality. The brain simply cannot process the magnitude of the threat, so it slows everything down. In that soft halogen light, Michael's throat, the very throat where the tumor is silently growing, tightens with sudden, acidic surge of pure, primal fear. It burns. He looks at the doctor's mouth moving, explaining treatment plans, radiation schedules, and survival statistics, but the words sound like they are coming from underwater. All he can hear is the scratch, scratch, scratch of that pen. In a fraction of a second, the entire architecture of his life collapsed. The movie scripts waiting on his desk, the upcoming vacations, the public image of the strong, virile leading man, they were all instantly vaporized by a single microscopic mutation in his cells. He was no longer the master of his universe. He was a hostage to his own flesh. When you hear a doctor say the word cancer, you don't think about your legacy. You think about how terrifyingly fragile breathing actually is. Have you ever sat in a sterile room and had your entire world dismantled by a single sentence from a doctor? The absolute terror of realizing your body is no longer a safe place to live. If you have survived that moment, or if you're sitting in that room right now, tell me in the comments. We see you, and you are stronger than you know. The tragedy of the diagnosis was compounded by a bitter irony. For months, Michael had been complaining of a sore throat, an earache, a persistent, nagging discomfort. He had seen doctors. He had been prescribed antibiotics. He had been told it was nothing serious. The medical establishment, perhaps intimidated by his status, perhaps negligent, had missed it. By the time he sat under the halogen lamp, the tumor was the size of a walnut. Stage 4. The cancer had entrenched itself deep in the base of his tongue, threatening his voice, his ability to eat, his very survival. The public would soon hear the sanitized version. A carefully drafted PR statement. A courageous interview on David Letterman where he smiled and made jokes about the odds. The world applauded his bravery, just as they had applauded his acting. They saw the Hollywood legend preparing for battle. But what the world did not see was the profound, humiliating terror of what that battle actually entailed. Courage on a talk show is one thing. Courage when the cameras are off and the reality of the treatment begins to tear your body apart cell by cell is something else entirely. He walked out of that Beverly Hills office into the bright California sun. But the world had permanently changed colors. The man who walked in was a king. The man who walked out was a patient entering a war zone. And the weapons required for this war were not going to spare him. They were going to burn him down to the foundation. Don't go anywhere, because what Michael Douglas endured in the months that followed is a descent into a physical hell that no script could ever prepare him for. The real fight for his life was just beginning, and it was going to strip him of every ounce of dignity he had left. There's a profound misconception about fighting a terminal illness. The language we use to describe it is always heroic. We call it a battle. We say someone is a warrior. We talk about kicking cancer's ass. This vocabulary is designed to comfort the healthy people watching from the sidelines. It creates the illusion that willpower alone can conquer raw biology. But talk to anyone who has actually walked through the fire of stage for cancer treatment, and they will tell you the truth. It is not glamorous. It is not cinematic. It is a systematic, humiliating dismantling of everything that makes you feel human. For Michael Douglas, an actor whose entire empire was built on his voice, his physical presence, and his undeniable vitality, the treatment was a meticulously designed torture. He did not simply fight cancer. He had to allow medicine to take him to the absolute brink of death in order to save his life. July 2010. The Treatment Center. The sanitized PR statement from his publicist spoke of a rigorous schedule. But let's strip away the Hollywood polish and look at the brutal, unvarnished reality. He is lying flat on a cold steel table, his head locked into a rigid, claustrophobic mesh mask bolted to the surface, so he cannot move a single millimeter. Above him, a massive linear accelerator machine rotates. It hisses like a jet engine spinning up, the mechanical whine vibrating through his skull as it fires highly targeted, invisible beams of radiation directly into his throat. This wasn't a one-time procedure. It was a grinding daily punishment. 5 days a week for 6 agonizing weeks. He was simultaneously being pumped full of aggressive chemotherapy. The physical toll was immediate and catastrophic. The radiation did not just attack the walnut-sized tumor. It carpet-bombed his entire mouth and throat. Inside the machine, Michael could feel his mouth tingling with acid. The delicate tissues of his throat were being burned raw. When the session ended and they unbolted the mask, the indignity continued. He would sit up, dizzy and nauseous, and regularly spit blackened, blood-tinged saliva into a clinical plastic basin. His once booming, authoritative voice-to-voice that had commanded millions of dollars and won Oscars faltered, cracking into a wet, painful near whisper. At the end of every session, he would smell the sharp, chemical reek of antiseptic strongly on his own breath, masking the smell of his own burning flesh. Every single swallow became a burning rasp. Eating, the most basic human function, transformed into an excruciating chore. The radiation systematically burned his taste buds to ash. He wasted away. The world watched in shock as paparazzi photos surfaced of a frail, hollow-cheeked old man shuffling through the streets of New York. The titan who had played Gordon Gekko was reduced to 142 pounds. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. Have you ever had to watch someone you love physically waste away? Or have you endured a treatment so brutal you weren't sure the cure was better than the disease? The sheer exhaustion of trying to stay alive when your body is screaming to give up? Tell me in the comments. Your survival stories are profound, and they need to be heard. He survived. The radiation worked. The tumor was eradicated. By 2011, the doctors declared him cancer-free. The press ran the triumphant headlines, "Michael Douglas beats cancer." The king returns. It was the perfect Hollywood ending. The hero slays the dragon and returns to his castle. But disease leaves a permanent fingerprint on the body. And survival is rarely a return to who you were before. It is a forced negotiation with whatever parts of you are left. Fast forward to late 2011. New York City. The cameras are gone. The talk show interviews are over. Michael is standing alone at the granite kitchen counter in his brownstone. His face is chalk white, the skin hanging a little looser on his bones now. He is not dining at a 5-star restaurant. He is carefully, painstakingly peeling orange slices for his dinner. As he works, the knife clinks against a ceramic plate. At the sound, he turns his head and he visibly winces. Years of heavy radiation have caused severe fibrosis. The muscles and tissues in his neck have hardened, becoming stiff as wood. The fluid, arrogant movements of his youth are gone forever. He places a piece of the orange in his mouth and chews slowly. He cannot taste the sweetness. The radiation damage is permanent. Each meal now tastes faintly, unavoidably metallic, like chewing on dull aluminum. When he finally forces the fruit down, he noisily, painfully clears his throat a wet, rattling sound that follows every single swallow. Even though he regained some weight, the swallowing difficulties remained a permanent, daily reminder of how close he came to the edge. The world saw a man who had conquered cancer and gotten his life back. What they could not see was a man standing in his kitchen, eating a metallic-tasting orange, grieving the body he used to have, and trying to make peace with the scarred, stiff, fragile vessel he was now trapped in. There is a specific kind of grief that comes with surviving a severe illness. It is the grief for the unscarred version of yourself. Have you ever looked in a mirror and had to introduce yourself to a body that survived a war, but will never be the same again? How did you learn to forgive your body for breaking? Share it with us below. Michael Douglas didn't just survive the cancer. He survived the cure. He rebuilt his strength. He returned to the screen, and he carried the physical stiffness and the metallic taste as silent badges of endurance. But there was one final reckoning waiting for him. A psychological knot that had been tied decades ago in a tobacco-scented study in Brooklyn. The cancer had tested his body, but the ultimate test of his soul was approaching. Stay with me, because the final chapter is not about fighting death. It is about making peace with the ghost that haunted his entire life. And what happened in a softly lit bedroom in 2020 would change the meaning of the name Douglas forever. There is an invisible ledger we all carry regarding our parents. On one side are the debts we owe them. On the other, the injuries they inflicted upon us. For most of our lives, we spend our energy trying to balance that ledger, chasing their approval, running from their shadows, or trying to prove that we are entirely different people. But there comes a moment, inevitable and absolute, when the ledger is forcibly closed. For Michael Douglas, the defining struggle of his existence was never truly about winning Oscars, surviving cancer, or navigating Hollywood. Beneath all the fame and the physical trauma, his life was a decades-long conversation, often spoken in silence, with one man, his father, Kirk. Kirk Douglas was a immovable mountain. He was a standard against which Michael measured every failure and every triumph. Michael had spent his youth hiding from Kirk's expectations in a tobacco-scented study, and his adulthood trying to build an empire vast enough to step out of Kirk's colossal shadow. Even when Michael became a global icon, the quiet, terrifying question remained: am I finally enough? February 2020. Beverly Hills. The noise of the world had faded away. The sprawling Douglas family is gathered in a softly lit, hushed bedroom. The air is heavy, not with the manic energy of a movie premiere, but with the profound, quiet weight of a century coming to an end. Kirk Douglas is 103 years old. In the corner of the room, Kirk's wooden cane leans against the wall, untouched. The gladiator has finally laid down his sword. Michael, now a scarred, 75-year-old survivor of his own wars, leans over his father's bed. The Hollywood titan who commanded billions at the box office is, in this exact moment, simply a son saying goodbye. He reaches out and presses Kirk's frail, paper-thin hand. Despite the failing body, the old man's legendary strength flickers one last time. Kirk tightens his grip around Michael's fingers. It is a surprisingly firm hold. Kirk pulls him slightly closer, his breath shallow, and whispers a single word into the quiet room. Remember, it wasn't a demand for legacy. It wasn't an instruction about the estate. It was a fragile human plea. And then the room falls completely silent. With a profound, agonizing gentleness, Michael raises his hand and slowly closes his father's eyes. If you have ever had to close the eyes of a parent, you know that the exact second the breath leaves the room, the entire architecture of your soul shifts. The lifelong shadows of ambition, the desperate need for approval, the lingering resentments over childhood absences in that softly lit room. Michael felt all of it evaporate. What was left was not the pressure of being Kirk Douglas's son. What was left was just love, stripped of all its Hollywood complications. He didn't need to outrun the mountain anymore. He was a mountain now. How does your relationship with a parent change the exact moment they are gone? Do the resentments fade, or do the questions just echo louder? If you have stood by that bed, share your experience in the comments. Let this be a space where we acknowledge the hardest goodbye. Which brings us back to where we started, early 2026. High above the muffled, restless traffic of Manhattan's Upper East Side, the 81-year-old man sitting alone in the gathering dusk. The apartment is entirely quiet, save for the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the antique clock. His phone buzzes on the table. A voice message from an old co-star. He walks slowly, his shoulders stooped, the stiff muscles in his neck aching slightly as he reaches for the device. He glances at the neatly stacked pile of medical journals on his nightstand. He is tired, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that comes from surviving a life lived at maximum velocity. He has lost his marriage, rebuilt it, nearly lost his son to addiction and carelessness, watched his body betray him, and buried the legend who gave him his name. The world still looks at him and sees a golden boy, the untouchable icon. They see the Oscars and the legacy. But Michael Douglas knows the truth. The awards are just metal. The legacy is just a story people tell when you are not in the room. What actually matters is the quiet survival. It is the ability to walk barefoot on the burning asphalt when you are broken, to swallow the metallic-tasting orange when your body is ravaged, and to finally close your father's eyes and forgive him for the shadow he cast. He is not invincible. None of us are. He is simply still here, bruised, stiff, permanently scarred, but absolutely undeniably here, choosing every single quiet morning to continue. And I want to leave you with one final question. Not about Michael Douglas, but about the ledger of your own life. When you look back at the battles you fought, the things you lost, and the scars you carry, can you honestly say you have made peace with the cost of your own survival? Because if this story has taught us anything, it is that true strength isn't about remaining unbroken. It is about learning how to live with the pieces. If Michael's journey has moved you, or if it made you think differently about the invisible battles we all fight behind closed doors, subscribe to the channel. Every week, we strip away the PR and the glamour to bring you the raw, human truth beneath the legend. Leave a like, drop your thoughts below, and if you know someone who is quietly fighting a battle of their own today, share this video with them. They might just need to know that even the Titans have to learn how to survive the dark.